Hello and welcome. Have you ever wondered why some curricula produce confident, capable learners while others leave students without knowledge they cannot apply? The difference often lies in the principles followed during curriculum development. Curriculum development is the process of planning, organizing, implementing, and evaluating what learners are expected to learn. It covers learning objectives, subject content, teaching methods, learning activities, resources, and even assessment. So a strong curriculum is not simply a list of topics. It is a complete learning planner that is designed around the needs of learners and also the needs of the society. So we are going to examine the major principles that guide curriculum development. And the first principle is relevance. Now, a curriculum should respond to the real needs of learners and their communities. So what students learn should help them understand the environment, it should help them to solve problems, develop useful skills, and also prepare for future responsibilities. For example, a modern curriculum can address areas like digital literacy, environmental responsibility, communication, things like financial awareness, and responsible citizenship. Now, content that has no meaningful connection to learners' lives can easily become difficult to understand or even to remember. And then the second principle is learner-centredness. And in this, learners should be at the center of the curriculum. You see? So when that curriculum is being developed, does the developer has the learner in mind? See? Curriculum planners must consider their ages, the ages of the learners, their abilities, their interests, the background where they come from, even their experiences and even stages of development. All those must be considered such that young children should have things like play, movement, stories, pictures incorporated in their curriculum because those are very much needed, you see. And then a learner-centered curriculum does not treat every student as identical. Instead, it recognizes that learners develop at different rates and also learners may require different forms of support. So those are all considerations that a curricular developer must consider. The third principle is clear purpose. Now, every curriculum must have some clearly defined aims, goals, and learning outcomes. Curriculum developers must be able to answer one important question, which is, what should learners know? What do they need to understand? And what do they need to know and to do, to be able to do or to value by the end of this program, you see. Clear outcomes will help to guide the selection of content, teaching methods, resources, and assessment. Without clear goals, teachers may cover many topics without producing meaningful learning for these learners. That is why it is very important to have a clear goal. Then the fourth principle is balance. Now, a good curriculum should support the learner's intellectual, physical, social, emotional, moral, and creative development. It should balance knowledge with practical skills, theory with application, individual work with collaboration, and academic achievement with character development. Balance also means giving sufficient attention to different learning areas for each learner. Therefore, a curriculum should not focus so heavily on examination subjects and then ignore creativity, physical health, things like communication, values, or life skills. All these are very important so that we can develop a holistic learner. And then the fifth principle is continuity. And continuity here, learning should continue in a logical and a connected manner over a period of time. Important knowledge and skills should be revisited and developed at increasingly advanced levels. For example, learners may begin mathematics by identifying numbers, then later they can learn addition, then later they learn multiplication, fractions, then algebra, and then they continue learning more complex problem solving as they grow. But each stage should build upon what was learned in the earlier years. Now, this gradual progression prevents unnecessary gaps and it helps the learner to develop a strong foundation. Then the sixth principle is sequence. And in sequence, content should be organized in an appropriate order. Learning usually moves from simple to complex. That is how it should be. They start with simple, they go to complex. They start from familiar, they go to what is unfamiliar. They start from concrete and then they go to abstract. They start with basic knowledge and then they go on to advanced application. Now, in this case, a learner should not be expected to write a complete essay before even developing vocabulary, sentence, knowing how to construct a sentence, maybe knowing how to develop a paragraph, you see. A proper sequencing makes learning understandable and manageable, where we have said that they should be taught step by step. They first learn vocabulary, how to write words, then how to write a sentence, and then a paragraph, and then with that now they can write a complete paper. And then principle number 7 is integration. And here, different subjects and learning experiences should be connected whenever possible. Life does not present problems in separate subject areas, so the curriculum should help learners to combine knowledge and skills. For example, an environmental project may involve science, mathematics, and even communication. It can also add technology to it and even social responsibility, art, all those. Because integration will allow the learner to see the relationship between ideas and also to apply their knowledge more effectively. Then principle number 8 is flexibility. And in this principle, technology, society, workplace and learners' needs should continue to change. We know that the world is changing, technology is changing, everything is changing. So learners we should bring up a learner who is flexible. And a curriculum must also be flexible to accommodate all the changes that are happening. A community must allow for adjustment and improvement. That is what we are calling flexibility. As things change, this curriculum should be able to change. Teachers may need to adapt activities based on the resources that are currently available. Maybe the local conditions may change, culture may change, even individual learning needs may change, and that should allow teachers to be able to incorporate the changes. However, flexibility does not mean abandoning the main learning outcomes. You see, it means finding appropriate ways to help different learners achieve them. So we are not changing the outcomes, we are only changing the way in which they are able to achieve those outcomes. And then the 9th principle is inclusivity. So in this principle, a curriculum should provide meaningful learning opportunity for every learner, including those with disabilities, those with different culture, those with different language, others with different backgrounds, and even learners with different abilities. So it should be able to accommodate all these learners. Curriculum developers should therefore examine whether the content, the examples, the materials they have given, and even the teaching strategies, whether they can include all these types of learners. Barriers that prevent participation should be identified and reduced to a minimum. The 10th principle is active learning, and here learners understand and remember more when they actively participate. Therefore, a strong curriculum should include experiments, projects, discussions, investigations, and even demonstrations on things like practical problem solving. And teachers remain important, of course, but the learner should not be a passive listener. They should not just sit and listen. They should have opportunities for themselves to question, to explore, to create, and even to reflect on what they have learned. Then the 11th principle is alignment. And alignment is about learning objectives, content, teaching methods, and assessments. Now, all these are supposed to support one another. So the learning objectives, the content, the assessments, they are supposed to support one another. So a learner should not be assessed in areas that they were not taught. You see, if the objective is to develop practical skills, for example, Learners should not be assessed only through written examinations. They should demonstrate those skills through practical tasks, projects, performance, or portfolios. Assessments are supposed to measure what the curriculum genuinely intended the learner to achieve. The final principle is continuous evaluation, and here, a curriculum should never be considered permanently complete. It must be reviewed to determine whether it is meeting its goals. And in this case, teachers, learners, parents, even education specialists and community members are supposed to provide valuable feedback to help know if this curriculum is meeting its goals. Additionally, assessment results and classroom observations can reveal what is working and what needs to be improved. So remember that when all these principles are followed, a curriculum becomes more than just a document. It becomes a meaningful pathway that will help learners to gain knowledge, to build on skills, and to develop values that will ultimately help them to be able to solve real-life problems. Thank you so much for watching this video, and all the best as you develop your curriculum. Bye.